I learned to count spring by paper cuts. Not blossoms, not dates, just the thin red stings across my fingers. Each a tally of books that had come apart and agreed, after some coaxing with glue and patience, to live again. When the door at the front of my bookbindery finally clicked, the bell coughed a small sound, as if even it was tired of winter. I didn't look up right away. The spine in my hands was old and stubborn, an 1891 tied almanac, whose cloth had faded to the color of diluted tea. Qingzhi. His voice sea-worn, careful. Back here, I said. Mind the stack of maps. He walked in with the weather. The room didn't have salt and wind, and a hush like fog between boats. When I finally lifted my head, the first thing I saw wasn't his face. It was the key. My key. Still sitting in the door. You forgot, I said. Did I? He turned, startled, then gave the smallest, guilty laugh. Sorry. The latch sticks. It doesn't, I said, softer than I felt. I am a person who repairs what breaks. It is both profession and superstition. People bring me the torn prayer books with split spines, atlases that have lost their north, wedding albums, fat with humidity and silence. I stitch, press, glue, sand. I bind. And in the evenings, when the gull's quiet, and the pub lamps glide into the cobbles like warm stars, I draw tide maps and lines of the sea's breath, annotated with cautious warning. Here, rip currents. Here, black rocks. Here, do not trust the moon. From London, I asked. He nodded. Consults ran long. His coat was a deep navy that made his eyes look almost black. He hung it on the peg by the kettle, and the hem brushed my drafting table where today's map lay half-finished. A study of the cove below St. Agnes, where the waves sometimes curled like handwriting and sometimes like a fist. When he leaned, the coat slipped, and something slid from the inner pocket and grazed the floor like a quiet coin. A photograph. Not paper. Skin. I didn't mean to look. Or perhaps I did. We all keep a private emergency kit. Excuses. Small mercies. Exits. Mine had run out, and my eyes reached for the picture like they had a will. Her. In sun that wasn't ours. The print was matte, the kind curators prefer, and it held the color of late afternoon, those hours that ask for confession. She stood by a row of glass panels speckled with salt, hair caught in a small wind, smile half-formed, like she was about to apologize for being beautiful. The caption on the back in pencil, Tidal Lost Things, draft proof. And then a name I had memorized by accident, and now on purpose. Liu Ryan. You'll say people don't have light inside them. I will disagree. Some carry a light that doesn't guide you home, only shows you how far away you are. She's back, I said, before I thought better. I kept my voice steady, like a good stitch. He didn't answer right away. The ambient noises came forward, the kettle's tired breath, the bell at the door settling into silence, a gull cutting the roof with a brief, irritated cry. It's work, he said at last. Isn't it always? She asked about a coastal venue for her new show. He went on, eyes trained on the photograph as if it might escape. Something with the sea close enough to hear it. She's titled it Tidal Lost Things. She has an eye for how water keeps records. She would. I returned the photo to the corner of his coat and smoothed the wool as if it were a page refusing to lie flat. And you have an ear for how it erases. He flinched barely, but I repair hairline fractures for a living. I know when material protests. Qingzhi, he began, the way people say the name of a place they've already left. I wanted to tell him about the almanac in my hands, how the owner had underlined a date in April 1892. And next to it written, don't forget Low, at 4:17. Don't forget. I wanted to ask what it is about the sea that makes us write notes to ourselves like children. I wanted to remain untouched by a small rectangle of paper. Instead, I said, do you want tea? Which is the Cornish version of trio. He nodded. I poured. The steam made its own soft weather between us, briefly fogging the glass over my drafting lamp. When it cleared, his eyes had a new caution in them, like a sailor measuring the distance between two lighthouses, and realizing the chart has shifted. I brought you something, he said, fishing another item from the coat. This time it was an envelope the color of battery acid, dressed up as gold. An invitation. I opened it. Tidal Lost Things, pre-opening. A London gallery name I knew too well. Our coast and 4 words that didn't belong to us. You're going, I said, to save him the trouble of asking. I thought we could, he replied, earnestly. Together, I echoed, tasting the word like water from a tin cup. We have been together for 3 years. The bookbinder release bears both our names. The kettle is bilingual in our habits. In summer, his marine surveys take him away for weeks at a time, measuring seabed temper and wind farm patience. And I pretend the empty bed is a project that needs the right glue. In winter, he returns with stories about slow storms and very fast decisions. We fit, or we learn to, but some lights are old debts. Some names are distances. He took a breath like it cost him. It's just one night. Ryan once she asked if I could talk about coastal acoustics during her walkthrough. The apology turned in his mouth, looking for a softer chair. It would mean something if you came. It would, I said. To whom? He looked at the envelope, then at the kettle, as if one of them might offer a better answer. The bell at the door coughed again. Someone peered in, decided a shop filled with spines and silences was not the right place to be brave, and left. You don't have to decide now, he tried. I already decided a long time ago, I said. And he took that as mercy until I added that I will not be a footnote in my own life. The sentence surprised even me. It felt like a slip of knife under old clothshire. Practiced, a little cruel, but kind too, if you care about truths that must be exactly cut to fit. He nodded, as if I had stated a tide time. There are arguments you can only have once. After that, it's the same weather arriving with new cloud shapes, and I am too fond of paper to let it warp more than it must. He reached for the invitation. I'll put this away. Leave it, I said. Maps need their legends. A half-smile seesaw, apologetic. We'll talk later. Of course, I said. When the tide is right. After he left, I fixed the almanac, linen thread, kettle-simmered paste, bone folder patience. Outside, the day tried on a lighter blue and decided against it. I traced my fingertip along the coast I had drawn and labeled a small white bay with an annotation I hadn't used before. Here, the sea remembers what we forget. Then I pressed the map beneath a weight, and with the door still warm from his leaving, I went to the peg and took the photograph out again. Everyone tells you not to look into the sun. No one warns you about looking into someone else's light. I slid the photo beneath the tide map, like a ship hiding under cloud. Then I took my key from the door and laid it on the table beside the invitation. If a map could forget my name, I decided, then I could teach my hands to remember it for us both. Outside, the gulls changed shift. The sea exhaled. And somewhere in London, a gallery wall waited to hold a thing that did not belong to it. Tonight, I would draw a warning I have never drawn. Here, do not anchor. Not because the water is treacherous, but because sometimes the safest thing is to let yourself drift, until the coast you deserve appears on its own. Some mornings, I wake before the sea. It sounds impossible. But there's a silence that exists between its breaths, a held moment, before it decides which mood to wear. That silence is where I work best. The glue pot on my table had cooled into amber skin. I touched it, fingertip first, the way one might test the pulse of something sleeping. The surface dented, then refused to close. A small, stubborn hollow. I smiled. That was how love behaves when unattended. It thickens, dulls, turns from bond to crust. I reheated the mixture over the kettle's steam. The smell vinegar paper, patience rose around me. Through the window, the tide still slept under a low fog, its color the gray of pewter spoons. Last night, after he left, I didn't cry. I pressed the tide map flat under weights, cleaned the brushes, and told myself that sorrow unexpressed is still repair work. You just don't get to see the spine straighten. The clock above the counter coughed at 9. I unlocked the front door. Cold air entered like an uninvited thought. Business was slow in spring. People preferred the open air to my quiet room of aging sentences. Around 10, the bell chimed and a woman appeared, hair braided with salt wind, cheeks flushed from the climb up the hill. She carried an armful of paper tubes, and looked at me with the frankness of someone who didn't yet know the local stories. "Are you Miss Ju, the bookbinder?" she asked. I nodded, wiping glue from my fingers. "I'm helping with an exhibition down the coast," she continued, lowering the tubes carefully. "We were told you did custom mountings for old charts. The show's called Tidal Lost Things." The name cracked open the room. I could almost hear the glue dry midair. She smiled, unaware of what she'd dropped into the tide between us. "They said you were the best at restoring edges without changing the feel of age." "I try," I managed. "What sort of charts?" She untied one. It unfolded like breath in 1880 maritime survey, corners freckled with salt stains. The coastline traced a thin silver thread I knew by heart, St. Agnes to Portruth, the same stretch that framed my own windows. "We want them remounted for the gallery," she said. "The curator's very specific about texture. She wants the sea to look remembered, not repainted." "Curator?" "Of course." "Her name?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "View Ryan," she said brightly. "You've heard of her?" My hands did something strange, they steadied. "Yes," I said. "I've heard." She didn't notice the tremor beneath the words. She was too busy explaining deadlines, transport crates, humidity levels. I took notes automatically, my handwriting as neat as betrayal requires. When she left, the bell rang once and silence resumed its post. I looked at the open chart on my table, the same coast, the same depth soundings, the same ridges that defined our small lives, and realized that somehow her project had arrived here before she did. I touched the edge of the map. The paper was soft, nearly tissue. It gave under pressure, but didn't tear. Another lesson from the sea: resilience is quiet, and often invisible. By afternoon, the fog had withdrawn, leaving a shy sun on the cobblestones. I stepped outside with a mug of weak tea and watched two boys chase their own shadows toward the pier. The tide had turned, everything was in motion again, except me. When I returned inside, something glimmered near the kettle, a small brass compass, the one he always carried. Its lid was open, needle trembling. He must have dropped it last night. I lifted it. It smelled faintly of metal and cedar, and of him. Inside the lid, on the scratched brass, an engraving I'd once laughed at: "Find your north, even when it moves." I placed it beside the invitation on the table. The two looked like siblings that had grown apart, one pointing somewhere, one asking me to stay. That evening, as the light softened to honey, I spread a new sheet of vellum and began sketching another map. Not of the sea this time, but of the town. Each lane, each chimney, each place we'd once mistaken for forever. At the corner where the cliffs met the bookshop, I left a blank space, and in tiny cursive wrote, "Here, the glue refuses to dry." The sea had pulled away overnight. By morning, the bay was bare to its bones, a glittering anatomy of rock and weed and small stranded shells that still believed in rescue. I watched from the cliff path, the chill eating softly at my fingertips. He was already there, down by the inlet, crouched beside his measuring tripod, sleeves rolled up, hair wind mussed. The engineer and him never slept. Even the tides had become data points. He was speaking into his recorder when he noticed me. "Early," he said, smiling as though nothing had fractured. I couldn't sleep. He climbed the short slope to meet me. The wind flung his scarf against my shoulder. The smell of salt and coffee wrapped around us like an old argument. "About last night," he began. "Which part?" I asked. "The invitation, or the silence after?" He looked down, tracing circles in the sand with his boot. "You were right to be angry." "I wasn't angry," I said. "I was remembering." That startled him. Remembering how it feels to be optional. He winced, then laughed quietly, the sound a crack in something once smooth. "You make it sound like I meant to." "You didn't." I cut in gently. "You just forgot that love isn't a background frequency. It needs tuning." For a moment, we stood watching the water creep back inch by inch. A stranded jellyfish glimmered in a puddle between rocks, translucent as a truth, too soft to live long. He said, "She's leaving for London next month." There it was, the confession shaped like weather, inevitable, slightly cruel. "For good?" I asked. "She says so. But she wants one more coastal shoot before she goes. And she asked you. She trusts me with the soundscape. It's familiarity, nothing more. Familiarity? The word lodged in my throat like grit. People mistake familiarity for safety. It's really just the comfort of old wounds. He added, you always said the sea keeps what we drop. Maybe this is just something unfinished washing back. I looked at him. Do you know what happens to things the sea keeps? They change shape. They lose their names. He sighed, heavy with the ache of someone trying to prove decency can erase damage. Qingzhi, I'm not choosing her over you. Maybe not. But you're choosing the part of yourself that still looks at her. He reached for my hand. His fingers were cold, rough with sand. I didn't pull away. Sometimes mercy wears the same face as surrender. Come tonight, he said. We'll have dinner, talk properly. The gulls overhead sounded like laughter cut too short. I nodded, not a promise, just acknowledgement. We walked back along the cliff path in silence. At the gate, he turned to say something, but the words drowned before surfacing. I left him with his data sheets and his wind. Inside the shop, the air smelled of glue and low tide salt. I set the compass on the counter, opened my journal, and wrote, love is not measured in tides returned, but in the quiet after withdrawal. Then I underlined it twice, because sometimes you need to make sure the wound knows where it is. That evening I didn't go to dinner. Instead, I followed the path down to the shore. The tide had come in again, erasing our footprints with diligent grace. Under the faint hum of waves, I whispered what the sea had been trying to teach me all along. Some things don't drift apart. They simply sink slowly, faithfully, until the light no longer finds them. London always smells like rain rehearsing. By the time I stepped out of the station, the city was half wet, streets glimmering with the shy confidence of something freshly hurt. I had told myself 100 times not to come, and yet here I was, an accidental witness to my own disobedience. The invitation, creased and salt-stained, rested in my coat pocket like a pulse. Tidal lost things, pre-opening reception. He had texted that morning, if you decide to come, I'll be waiting by the west door. No pressure. No pressure, as if tides asked permission before returning. The gallery sat inside a renovated warehouse near the docks, its brick walls smelling faintly of salt and old machinery. Inside, the air hummed, the soft chatter of patrons, the polite laughter of art trying not to be awkward. I stood at the entrance long enough for my resolve to feel foolish, then walked in. The photographs were enormous. Sea foam suspended mid-crash, driftwood balanced like relics, children's shoes half buried in sand, all rendered in that quiet tone only she could find. Leo Ryan's light was still the same, melancholic, reverent, cruelly honest. It was the kind of beauty that didn't ask to be loved, only remembered. And there he was, by the far wall, explaining something to a small group of guests. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, a weariness that didn't come from travel but from carrying too many silences at once. His hands moved as he spoke, describing acoustics, the way the sea carries sound farther on colder nights. The guests nodded politely, not hearing the sentence hiding between his words. Then she turned the curator, the artist, the white moonlight name that had become a fault line, Lou Ryan. She was almost exactly as in the photograph, only more real in the small unedited gestures, brushing her sleeve, smiling too quickly, blinking as though light itself surprised her. When her eyes found me, something unreadable flickered, curiosity, maybe, or recognition dulled by time. Ms. Ju, she said, crossing the floor with a warmth that felt practiced but kind. You must be the cartographer book. I've heard your work is extraordinary. Her voice carried that same rhythm I remembered from recordings, clear, deliberate, the cadence of someone used to being quoted. I repair maps, I said, mostly the kind that forget names. She laughed softly. Then you'll understand this show better than anyone. He joined us then, a breath late. You came. I did. I looked at both of them, their ease, their shared vocabulary, and wondered if love could die of language. He gestured toward one of the installations, a wall of tide charts stitched together with transparent thread. The thread caught the light, turning every intersection into a small glimmering wound. Beneath the weave, Tiny captions read things like retrieved at low tide and still missing. It's her new series, he said. She's documenting the sound of loss, pairing visuals with recorded sea acoustics. It's beautiful, I said, and meant it. Beauty isn't loyalty's enemy. It just makes betrayal harder to hate. Ryan smiled, modest, but her eyes searched mine for something, approval. Absolution. I used some of the antique charts from your region, she said. Your bookshop's reputation travels faster than the post. I felt the ground shift. You've been to my shop. Not yet, she said. But your bindings arrived with the shipment this morning. Perfect work. He blinked, realizing before I did that the shipment must be the same maps delivered last week. So my hands had already built frames for her memories. I'm glad they reached you intact, I managed. We stood there, 3 people, pretending the air wasn't thinning. Around us, conversation swelled and receded like small waves. Ryan was soon called away by another curator. Before leaving, she touched my arm gently. The sea always returns what we lose, she said, but sometimes it gives it to someone else. After she walked off, silence settled like fine sand. He turned to me. That wasn't planned, Qingzhi. She didn't. I know. I smiled, tired. The sea doesn't plan either. It just moves. He looked as though he wanted to say more, but the lights dimmed for the next installation, an audio projection of waves recorded at different depths. His voice, captured from his fieldwork, filled the room, at 3 meters. Sound bends differently, like love heard through water. People around us murmured appreciation. I couldn't breathe. I slipped out before the applause. Outside, rain had begun again, light but persistent. The street lamps turned the drops into liquid amber. My reflection followed me in every puddle, faint, blurred, but still there. At the corner, I paused, pulled the compass from my pocket, and flipped it open. The needle trembled, undecided between north and home. I'm done being someone's map, I whispered, and let the rain close the compass for me. When I got home from London, the sea had already erased me. The tide line outside the window was clean, unpunctuated, as if the shore had decided to forget my name out of mercy. The bookbindery smelled faintly of rain and train dust. On the counter lay the invitation, now warped by damp, and beside it the compass, its needle lazy as if even direction had lost interest. I hung up my coat, boiled water, and waited for the kettle's whistle to make the room sound human again. But when it came, the sound echoed strangely, like it had nowhere left to land. I opened my sketchbook. The first page was still the town map I'd begun the week before. Half-finished lines looping around places that used to mean something. The pencil trembled slightly. My hand was steady, but my intent wasn't. That night at the gallery had left me hollow, but not broken, more like a coastline after storm surge. Reshaped, unrecognizable, yet still existing. So I started a new project. A map of absences. No colors, no coordinates, only pale graphite outlines of things that were once between us. The chair he always left half-turned, toward the window. The mug with a crack like a smile that never healed. The part of the bed that stayed cool no matter how many winters passed. Each object became a small, uncharted island. I labeled them in whispering script. Area of hesitation. Unsent words. Where the light hit him first. By midnight the map had grown into something wild. A geography of loss, patient and precise. I pinned it to the wall above the drafting table. The wind outside pressed against the glass as if it wanted to read. For days I lived inside that quiet ritual. Customers came and went. I repaired their books, answered softly, and returned to my drawing. At night, the house creaked like an old ship remembering its voyages. He came by once, 2 evenings after the exhibition. I saw his reflection in the window before I heard the bell. Qingzhi, he said, voice low. Can we talk? I didn't turn. We're already talking. He stepped closer, stopping just behind the table. I shouldn't have asked you to come, I thought. Maybe if you saw it, you'd understand. I did, I said. That's why it hurts less than it should. He hesitated, glancing at the wall. What's that, my new map? He studied it, brow furrowed. There's nothing on it. Exactly. He took another step. then stopped when he noticed one of the tiny labels, "Do not return." His breath caught. "Is that for me, for us?" I corrected. Silence stretched thin between us, translucent as tracing paper. Finally he whispered, "You think it's over?" "I think it's changed shape." I faced him then. Some things are meant to stay tidal. Push and pull, never anchor. He nodded slowly, eyes searching for a place to rest. "I'll come back tomorrow." I smiled, though we both knew the sea never keeps that promise. If the tide allows. When he left, I traced one last line across the page from the coastline of what we were, to the white margin of what we might have been. Then I labeled it, "Safe waters for drifting." Outside, the wind turned gentler, as if agreeing. The compass on the counter spun once, aimless and free, and stilled. That night I dreamed of a blank ocean where every wave whispered a different version of goodbye. It started with a sound, a soft tear, like fabric surrendering. I looked down and saw the spine of a customer's prayer book give way, the stitching snapping in quiet defeat. For a moment, I simply watched it fall apart. Then I realized I was crying. Not loudly, not even visibly, just enough for a single tear to land on the page and blur the word Amen. The ink spread slowly, blooming like a bruise. That was when I knew the books had started bleeding for me. I stayed late that night. Outside, the wind smelled of iron and rain. Inside, the lamplight trembled. I stacked the half-repaired volumes on the table, each one bandaged with string and glue. My hands smelled of starch and sorrow. He hadn't come back. Not yesterday. Not today. The tide, perhaps, had obeyed its own rule. Do not return. At midnight, I opened the drawer and took out an envelope I'd been ignoring for days. The flat beige one marked lease renewal. The due date was tomorrow. I read it twice, then folded it once more and slid it aside. The decision was already made, though I hadn't said it out loud. I was leaving. The shop had been our small country, our conversations echoing through paper, our laughter absorbed by wood. But now every shelf felt like witness, every lamp like an accusation. I packed quietly, the bone folder, my inks, the tide maps that hadn't sold. I left behind the heavy press machine. It belonged to the building more than to me. When I lifted the stack of finished books, the glue hadn't fully dried. A drop fell, milky white against the wood, and ran like slow blood. The bell above the door shivered once, perhaps from the wind, perhaps from memory. I paused to write a note. Chinked one, the glue is still wet. Don't touch the books yet. I've marked where each of them bleeds. If you want to understand what broke us, start there. I left the note on the counter, beneath the compass. The needle turned weakly toward the window, then stopped. When I stepped outside, the rain had just begun, not a downpour, just enough to sound like pages turning. I didn't look back. If I did, I might have stayed to fix something that no longer wanted repair. Down the hill, the harbor lamps flickered through mist. For the first time, I noticed how the sea, even in darkness, kept moving relentless, forgiving, indifferent. Somewhere inside me, a voice whispered, "You can love something and still decide to leave it whole." So I walked. Each step a small unbinding. And behind me, in the little shop by the tide road, the books went on bleeding quietly, faithfully, in my place. The letter found him 2 days later. Folded neatly, left on the counter beneath the compass, her handwriting, familiar and steady, though the words carried the weight of someone already gone. The glue is still wet. Don't touch the books yet. I've marked where each of them bleeds. He read it twice. Once as an engineer, searching for structure. Once as a man, searching for mercy. Both readings ended in silence. He went to the work table. The books were still there, their spines pale, threads taut. When he lifted one, a thin ribbon of white glue broke across his fingers, leaving a ghostly film that refused to dry. He could smell her paper dust, soap, a trace of something sea-sweet. The compass needle trembled toward the door. He followed it. Outside, the storm from the night before had left the cobblestones shining. The shop sign creaked in the wind, one hinge broken. He walked down the hill, past the harbor, to where the cliffs began. The sky was a low bruise, the air thick with salt. Every few steps, The wind carried fragments of her voice, or maybe just his guilt pretending to have sound. He reached the headland. The lighthouse beam still turned, sweeping the fog like a tired heartbeat. Below, the tide was swelling, slow but certain. He shouted her name. It scattered in the wind and came back hollow. For a moment, he imagined she might appear from the path, sketchbook in hand, smiling the way she used to when she caught him watching her. But only gulls answered, circling above the cliffs like scraps of unfinished letters. He sat on a rock and took out the compass. The inscription inside seemed cruel now. Find your north, even when it moves. It had moved toward her, always toward her. He thought of all the times he'd measured the sea, calculating currents, mapping safe zones, believing precision could prevent loss. But love was not a coastline, it was a tide. You couldn't own it, only meet it, or miss it. The first wave reached his boots. Cold. Immediate. He closed his eyes and let it hit. In his mind, he saw her walking along the opposite shore, hair caught in the wind, sketching the absence between them like a prayer she no longer believed would be answered. I was supposed to be your anchor, he whispered. The sea answered with foam. He stayed there until the tide licked at his knees, until the lighthouse blinked twice and the rain returned, soft as forgiveness. Then he stood, heart heavy but clear. He turned back toward the town, toward the little shop, the note, the bleeding books. He didn't know if she'd ever come back. He only knew he wanted to be the kind of man who would wait without demanding. As he climbed the path, the sea roared behind him, not in anger, but in applause. Sometimes redemption sounds like water closing over what it loves. He came back on a Tuesday, carrying nothing but the sea. His coat was damp, his hair uncombed, his eyes a kind of quiet I hadn't seen before, the calm that follows surrender. The shop smelled of absence and glue. I'd returned only that morning, to collect the last of my things. The tide had been kind, left the path dry enough for goodbye. When the bell rang, I almost didn't look up. But some sounds you recognize even when you stop believing in them. Qingzhi, he said. I set down the box of brushes. You found the note. I found everything, he replied, stepping closer, and lost the rest. We stood in the doorway, the rain tracing small rivers along the frame. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from what happens when someone realizes the apology is late. He took out the compass. Its brass surface was dull now, the engraving worn. It stopped pointing north, he said. I thought maybe it was broken, but then I realized it was me. I smiled, not out of cruelty, but recognition. Maybe it finally learned to stay still. He nodded. I went to the cliffs. I know, I said softly. The sea told me. He looked at me then, not the way he used to, not as if I were something to keep, but as something he'd once been part of. I thought if I could measure what went wrong, I could fix it. You can't measure a tide by the shells it leaves, I said. You can only listen to how it goes. Silence settled between us. The kind that no longer hurts. It just exists. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key, the same one he had once forgotten in the door. Its brass was darker now, worn smooth by salt and time. I think this belongs to you, I said. He stared at it, the way one looks at something that used to be alive. Keep it, he whispered. I shook my head. It doesn't fit anymore. He took it, fingers brushing mine, a brief familiar heat. The contact felt like the end of a sentence that had been too long in the writing. I don't know where to go, he admitted. Then start by going nowhere, I said. Let the sea teach you stillness, before you ask it for direction. He smiled, small, weary, real. Will I see you again? Probably, I said. The world is round. But I'll be different when you do. He nodded, slipped the key into his pocket, and stepped back. You deserve calm water. And you, I said, deserve to stop trying to swim against every current. He laughed a sound fragile and new, then turned toward the rain. When the door closed, it didn't echo. It simply rested. I went to the window. The tide was rising again, slow, patient, inevitable. Somewhere out there, the sea was rewriting our footprints. I pressed my palm to the glass and whispered, let him find another shore. And in the reflection, I almost believed I could see one forming a place both of us might reach someday, separately, and at peace. Spring came quietly that year, as if unsure it was welcome. The storms left, but the wind lingered, gentle now, almost curious. I had moved into a small attic studio above the harbor cafe, a space that smelled of paint, salt, and new beginnings. The landlord, an elderly sailor named Whippy, said the room once stored nets and broken anchors. Good luck, he told me, tends to hide where things used to sink. Each morning I opened the windows and let the sea air unroll like linen. The horizon no longer felt like a border, but a direction. I began a new series of maps, smaller this time, watercolor instead of ink. They weren't about tides or absences anymore. They were about places people rest in before they move on. A bench beneath the lighthouse, a bakery at dawn, a window where someone once waited and decided not to. I called the collection Atlas of Soft Goodbyes. The name came to me while sketching the harbor, the fishing boats swaying like tired punctuation, gulls folding themselves into commas above the water. Every goodbye, I realized, was just a pause disguised as an ending. Some afternoons I helped at the cafe downstairs, serving coffee to tourists. One of them, a visiting photographer named Elliot, began staying longer each day, first for coffee, then for conversation. He never asked about the past. Instead, he talked about light, how certain mornings in coastal towns could turn sorrow transparent. His presence felt like watercolor, seeping slowly into the paper until it belonged there. One evening, after closing, he lingered at the counter. "You always draw the sea," he said, "but never yourself in it." I smiled. Maybe because I'm still learning which part of it I am. He nodded, thoughtful. Then maybe draw the shore. That's where both worlds meet. Later that night, I did. I painted a shoreline neither stormy nor calm, just honest waves arriving, leaving, arriving again. And on the sand, a single pair of footprints facing seaward, not waiting, just watching. When it dried, I titled it Where I Stayed. Days folded into weeks. The studio filled with light and quiet laughter, with the smell of roasted beans from below and wet paper drying on string. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, I thought I could still hear the faint ring of the shop bell by the tide road, or the whisper of pages turning. It didn't hurt anymore. It simply existed, like background tide noise in an old recording. One afternoon a package arrived. No return address. Inside, the compass, polished, repaired, its needle steady again. Beneath it, a small note in his handwriting. "You were my north after all. May this point you wherever peace lives." I placed it on my desk beside the new maps. The needle twitched, then settled, pointing not to the sea, not to the cliffs, but to the window, where sunlight pooled on the floor. And for the first time, I didn't wonder if he'd come back. I just whispered, "Safe waters," and went back to painting. Outside, the gulls called to one another, and the tide, faithful as breath, kept time for a life finally unfolding. The summer arrived so gently that I didn't notice it at first. The harbor shed its gray, and everything boats, gulls, people seemed to inhale at the same time. I had finished the Atlas of Soft Goodbyes exhibition. It wasn't grand, just a local show at the cafe, but people came, lingered, left notes that smelled faintly of salt and ink. They said the maps made them feel less lost. That was enough. On the last day, I stood before the final piece, a wide, pale map painted only with air and breath marks from the watercolors drying. I hadn't drawn any borders. Only one sentence across the bottom. "Here, even the sea learns to rest." Elliot helped me take the frames down. When we reached the last one, he smiled. "You know, you could sell them all." "I'd rather give them away," I said. "Maps belong to people who need directions." He looked at me for a long moment. "And you? Do you still need one?" I thought about it, tracing the grain of the table with my thumb. "Maybe not. I think I've become one." He laughed softly. "Then maybe I'll get lost on purpose." That night I walked to the pier alone. The air tasted like moonlight and salt. The tide was full, the water calm, whispering its quiet alphabet against the stones. I unrolled one of my maps, an unfinished one, drawn weeks ago, and held it up to the wind. The paper trembled, edges fluttering like a living thing. For a moment, it looked like it might take flight. The stars were faint, the horizon open. I whispered into the dark, not to him, not even to the sea, but to the part of myself that once waited too long. You can go now. The wind answered by lifting the map gently from my hands. It sailed a few feet, then settled on the water, floating like a small, quiet heart. The tide carried it away. I watched until it disappeared, until the waves folded over it softly, leaving nothing but ripples. And in that emptiness, something inside me expanded a breath long overdue. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is. A map that finally learns how to breathe.